Good evening, my friends. This is the Grim Tutor, and I hope you're doing very well tonight. It's time for another grading session. It's time to see whether the Black Monday offerings will live up to their hype. And I think it's very amusing that I have kind of memed myself into doing a review of all 121 of these cards when these are shaping up to be some of my least viewed videos that I've done in a while. But you know what? Great art is not always appreciated in its time. The plebs would never understand the esoteric importance of reviewing every single time-shifted card, looking at the same exact art, and then looking at the art again in an old border and saying which one is better and by how much. So for those of you who do understand the dreadful import of this, I salute you. Thank you so much. Let's get into it. Let's look at the Black Monday cards, the coolest color in Magic. Being time-shifted, we love to see it. And we're starting off with Gurmag Angler. Now, I mentioned in an earlier video that this block, like this whole world of Tarkir, definitely lends itself pretty well to the new frame. That said, Gurmag Angler remains a card that benefits immensely from the time shifting. The old border looking real good on this big old zombie fish, and also I would say that Gurmag Angler is an iconic card in Modern. Even though Grixis Death Shadow does not see as much play as it used to, there's all kinds of other Shadow variants in town. It's no longer the top dog, right? And, maybe a meta shift could bring it back to being top dog, but it's not the premier way to play Shadow all of the time. That said, Angler again does remain iconic, and people for a while have referred to Grixis Shadow specifically as a legacy deck that happens to be Modern legal, and therefore what better card to time shift than a cornerstone of Modern's most legacy-like deck, or at least one of them. So Gurmag Angler kicking us off strong here on Black Monday with a straight-up A. Good job, zombie fish. Next up, we have the Banana King himself, Tazagar the Golden Fang, pretty much the closest thing you can get to being a Gurmag Angler without actually being one. And everything I just said about the Angler also rings true for Tazagar, except that he is not a cornerstone of Grixis Shadow as much as the big fish is anyway. Now, what do we think about this? Well, again, all of the same points do apply. However, I think Tazagar's art here on this Fate Reforged original printing definitely really embodies that whole ethos of the block in a very, very strong way, and whereas Gurmag Angler could kind of belong to a wide variety of different sets, Tazagar is definitely a Fate Reforged or Fate Reforged adjacent card, I would say very clearly. Therefore, does not quite benefit as much from time shifting as the Angler. And that is even more true when you remember that this bone-chilling UMA box topper alternative art printing of Tazagar exists. This will always give an edge to the Tazagar player if said player wishes to unnerve their opponent, for their opponent to break out into a cold sweat. This will never not creep me out, my friends. And this is a very different take on the Banana King, who is, so pleasantly reclining in the original art. Very different energy in the second one. Let's just put it that way. So with that said, the time shifting of Tazagar, not as clear or as necessary of an upgrade as his compatriot, the Angler. So Tazagar, gonna give a good old B+2. I think that's about right. Now, a quick but slightly blasphemous, admittedly, digression to review a card that does not have the old border, has not been time-shifted, but this one really stood out to me, guys. A Street Wraith, new art, who would have guessed it? And also because we are kind of comparing an old border to a new border, I guess, with the original printing, of course, being Future Sight. Now, to me, all Future Sight cards, basically, that establish themselves in Modern using the Future Sight frame are iconic. Inherently, that is just how I see it. Street Wraith among the very most iconic, perhaps shy only, of our favorite green Lurgoyf, right? But there is a new art available for Street Wraith, and while I'm very partial to the old one, not only the frame, but also the color palette, the very understated kind of murky quality of it, very nice, very nicely done. We now have a different option for those into a different aesthetic. This is a vampy aesthetic. This is like your Street Wraith has become your emo goth boyfriend, right? And for those of you who are in the market for such a thing, you could do worse than picking up this Street Wraith. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't really know how to grade it because it's not an old border. I'm going to give it a B. I actually like the art a lot, especially the background, and I like all of the art, basically, but it is hard to call it any kind of a clear upgrade over the future Sight Wraith we know and love. Now, did you know, my friends, have you heard the good word that everybody's favorite turn 0 play, Leyline of the Void, now comes in the old border, now comes Time Shifted? That's right, very exciting. But what do we think about it? What do we think about it relative especially to the alternatives? Because remember, there are 3 Leylines of the Void to choose from. We have Time Shifted, in this case, the Guild Pact version, the original printing, and that's got to count for something, right? The original printing, all else being equal, does tend to be the most nostalgic, the most desirable for people, and I personally like the Guild Pact art a lot. I love the blackness of the night sky, contrasted with the kind of whitish purple ley line that is flooding this city. The city itself looks really intriguing, definitely looks appropriate for the site of a ley line. And let's look at the other ones. They come from core sets. M11. I really, really, really like the M11 art, but it is not as iconic or as representative of a ley line to me as the Guild Pact one. It is more subtle, it is more understated, and that is exactly how you would sum up Rob Alexander. He is one of my very favorite landscape artists, and it's a really good idea to have him do Leyline of the Void. It is a different take on Leyline, whereas the original Leyline is a lot more active, a lot more kind of in-your-face, Leyline of the Void M11 style, again, a little bit more subterranean and subtle. I do like it, but it is not my favorite. My favorite is the Guild Pact one. And then the M21 from Noah Bradley. I think a lot of people were hyped about this. Noah Bradley is a very good artist and a very popular one, but to me, this is my least favorite. I'm not exactly sure why. I think it is a little bit too swift moving in its appearance, or maybe a little bit too busy, a little bit too explosive. I'm not sure if any of those quite nails it, but you kind of get what I'm driving at here, I hope. So this is going to be subjective as always, but those are my thoughts on the 3 different ley lines, and I think in terms of this, again, looking at the 3 in a vacuum, the original is my favorite. The original also, to me, is the best candidate for time shifting, not just because it's my favorite in a vacuum, but because this city that we're seeing could belong to so many of Magic's earlier blocks. It could be Arabian Nights, it could be Mercadian Masks, it could be something out of Weatherlight, to me, and it goes on and on and on. So the kind of ancient tree is present in this Leyline of the Void, and therefore, despite some really decent alternatives, some really compelling alternatives, Leyline of the Void has got me so hyped that I am going to give it the solid A. Sanguine Bond is a pretty cool one, my friends. I do suspect, although I don't know for a fact, that it is a Commander staple, and it's been reprinted a lot, only with this art. So in that sense, it is a pretty cool decision to time shift it, and this is the only choice for the art with which to do it. And I do think, actually, that the art suits the time-shifted frame pretty well. If you look at what the coloration of the frame and of the white letters of the title of the card especially does to the piece overall, I think that is a big upgrade. And also the fact, maybe the execution of this piece is just a little bit more modern, but the fact that they would commission artwork that is just a close-up of 2 hands, 2 long-nailed hands, kind of just filtering blood through one another. This commission, this style, this decision to make this the art for this card could belong perhaps most easily to the very old eras of Magic. Does anyone else know what I mean by that? Obviously, it can belong to newer eras too, but when you see stuff like this in newer eras, it seems more like a conscious callback to the older style of art. Again, maybe not 100% in execution, but more an idea. So with that in mind, I think this is a really solid one. I'm going to give it an A-. I think that's right about, for me, where it falls. Zulaport Cutthroat, another pretty cool one that might earn an A-, maybe downgrading just a hair to a B+. I'm teetering here on the edge. It's not my very favorite art of all time, but it's good. I have nothing to complain about. It's definitely a really, you don't see that many black humans, especially ones that manage to see play outside of standard or draft or something. And Zulaport Cutthroat is a pretty cool take on a black human. Definitely a fan. And overall, a card that is a fine choice, I guess, but I guess where it just falls a little bit shy of an A for me is the fact that it doesn't necessarily feel like an older card to me. This feels like it belongs to the types of design that are post old borders change into the new fangled frame that we are now undoing the damage of, right? Not in the sense that it's a fire card or anything, but just in the sense that nothing about the card particularly feels old to me. Now, you might also say that, or you might also assume that the other alternative printing of Zulaport Cutthroat also might serve to take the time-shifted grade down just a hair. For me, it really doesn't. You know, this printing doesn't do anything for me, specifically if you look at the detailing or lack thereof on the face, on the arms, on anywhere the flesh of the cutthroat is exposed. This isn't really it for me. Even though the background is nice and even though the framing is nice, this is not a copy I would use. I would absolutely 100% use the time-shifted copy, but again, is this really the very best candidate? Is this really the very most exciting card? Probably not, so we're going to give this guy a B+, which I think is about fair to me. Next up, we've got a clear winner, a gold mine here in the decision to time shift Dismember. Now, Dismember benefits immensely from the old frame, specifically because there is an interesting contrast between seeing the Phyrexian mana symbols in the top right and seeing the old frame around that. That's something that's very, very unique, and while not directly, synergistic or not a direct sensible callback, I think the contrast is actually kind of delightful to me. And also, this promo art of Dismember, which is the one rather than the original new Phyrexia printing that they chose to time shift, is my favorite art by a little bit. I like both Dismember arts. I like that they're kind of depicting similar things. They're both abstract. Let's show you the other one. They're both a little disturbing in terms of how much they leave to the imagination, while in other ways showing you exactly what is named on the card, a dismembering, right? It is definitely a very, very disturbing and very iconic card. And again, I do like both arts. We have Therese Nielsen doing the original, Jason Felix doing the promo, and I think just barely the Jason Felix art does lend itself better to the coloring and the framing of the time-shifted approach. Either way, I would have been happy with either one. I think this card is definitely, though, a fabulous, fabulous decision. It's going to get an A from me. Next, we have Shriekma, or should I say Krishmal. I definitely mispronounced that, but we have Shriekma time shifted. This is the only available art, and it's another one that's been reprinted a lot, but never with any different art, so why not give it the old border treatment? I think I said in a previous video in this series that Evoke is a mechanic that feels like it could have been older than it actually is to me, and I would like to also continue advocating for that to be factored in here. And, Shriekma's art, kind of like the Sanguine Bond I talked about a couple slides ago, is something that perhaps not quite the execution in every way, but definitely the commissioning of art like this feels like it could belong to an earlier time. And I think the face, if you can call it that, of this elemental, is definitely itself bespeaks older eras of Magic, whereas maybe this coiling serpentine body looks a little bit newer, right, as far as the art direction is concerned. In any case, those are my thoughts on Shriekma. I think it's a good candidate for this. Not quite hitting it as much out of the park as other uncontested upgrades, so I think A- is where I settle here. Next up, a brief illumination in the blanket of night from all of these black cards with a very bright artifact, Crystal Shard, and this card is bad, and I did not know it existed until right now. But I am going to give it an A, because this is just such a stark example, my friends, of what the brown border on an artifact does to certain art and certain cards in general with their feel to give it just that true Magic the Gathering feeling. And again, as I said in the first video in this series, I actually like the grayish-white newer border for artifacts, but I just love the old brown border that much more in Crystal Shard, having a, relatively cool color palette, all things considered, being a relatively simple but well-executed piece of art. This is kind of what old artifacts usually used to look like, right? There are obviously exceptions, and they are legion, but in general, when I look at this card, I see one that fits directly into the brown border, so this one gets an A from me, no contest. And here we go! It is Thoughtseize time, it is hype time. It is the Lorwyn Printing, of all things, that is getting time shifted. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Can we really slap a grade on this without thinking about it? No, we have to remain sober. So, number one, what other Thoughtseize printings are there? Number two, how badly does Thoughtseize really need an old border? I mean, come on. And number three, which is the best printing to put into an old border if we needed it? So the Lorwyn Printing, of course, is what we're looking at. This is the original. This is a very sought-after card, just the pack rare, the pack foil. These are very, very iconic cards in Magic as a whole, especially in Modern, right? And most people do favor the Thoughtseize art depicted here. It is definitely really cool. From Alexi Bricklot, it is, basically showing us the dark side of the Fae, right? Very, very cool. And something about it is just very compelling, very iconic. I'm overusing that word, but we're seeing a lot of cards that really do fit the bill. But as I say, there are alternatives, and a lot of people, they kind of poo-poo the Theros art. I'm not one of them. I actually like the Theros art a fair amount, and only after playing BGX for a long time did the Lorwyn art start to grow more and more on me. I originally actually considered which Thoughtseizes to get, and I said, well, I like the Lorwyn ones a little bit better, but the Theros ones are significantly cheaper. This was true in paper, and it was true to a lesser extent online, so I ended up playing the Theros ones because I said, BGX is expensive anyway. I like Lorwyn a little bit better, but not enough to break the bank for it. But over time, as I played with and against BGX decks more and more, the Lorwyn one came to really represent what Thoughtseize is for me. So over time, the gap widened. But I still do, respect the Theros art. We have a few other ones to consider as well. The art actually on this Thoughtseize, this Amonkhet Invocation, is actually pretty cool. The problem is the frame, and I know the Invocation split opinion. Personally, I don't care for them almost at all. There are a couple exceptions, but mostly it's like, okay, the art is good, and that's why I like the Invocation. I still hate the frame. And that's kind of true here, but with Thoughtseize having so many compelling alternatives, I'm not really going to reach for it, but it is out there for those who like it, and some certainly do. Worth also briefly noting that online, I believe this is Amonkhet Remastered, and you can get that Thoughtseize art in the traditional new frame, definitely something to note. And we also have the new addition to the Thoughtseize family from Double Masters, which is a really unique take on it. The background imagery here kind of calls to mind old blue cards, like Memory Lapse. And the foreground, of course, is similar, maybe not in style, but in terms of what it features, to the original Lorwyn art for Thoughtseize. On top of that, you have kind of a whitish color that's kind of suffusing this whole piece that makes this an especially good fit in Orzhov or Abzan or Esper, right? And on top of that, you have the full art, extended art printing, so this is definitely a printing of Thoughtseize that you cannot dismiss. Whatever your thoughts overall on what your favorite is, where this one ranks relative to the other ones, there is so much going on here, there is so much to like. You cannot outright dismiss this. I do not accept it. So having established that there is plenty of healthy competition here for the best Thoughtseize, I still personally favor the Lorwyn one above all. It is a little more simplistic in a very good way. Like, there's not as much going on, but at the same time, there is so much going on, right? It's complex in the fact that it is it's extremely well done, while it's also really narrow in its focus. And that really is emblematic of Thoughtseize the card in terms of what it represents and also what it literally does. So anyway, enough said about the card. Is this really the best candidate to time shift? I would say yes. If you look at just how good this looks in the new frame, it's going to look even better in the old frame. This is very much traditional in the sense of how Magic art used to be in so many ways, especially with the kind of strands of lighter energy that represents the thoughts being extracted from the victim here. That is such classic old school Magic art to me that I can't even describe it, and therefore the perfect candidate for time shifting. So despite a very, very strong field of competitors, of competing printings to this soon-to-be available time-shifted Lorwyn Thoughtseize, I do have to give this one, my friends, an A+. What a fantastic decision to do it. What a fantastic decision to make it the Lorwyn original art, and what fantastic execution. So this is the new best Thoughtseize in town, if you ask me. Next up, we have Harvester of Souls, and this is the only art available for this card. And my assessment of the art is that it is good. It is raw. It is compelling. It is visceral. It is a little bit frightening, but having said, and it is well executed, but having said all of that, it is just a little bit cartoonish, just a little bit. This is not, me bagging on the art. I actually like it quite a lot, but it falls just shy of the top tier for me. It is simply very good, not great to me, relative to the pantheon of great Magic art. However, if you look at the old frame, that actually makes that slight cartoonish aspect to this Harvester of Souls okay. It makes it fit in. It makes it better. It enhances it. The art now plays into the border plays into the art. It all looks very, very good. It looks a little bit more like it was all meant to come together in exactly this way. And this is the power of this old border that I am so obsessed with. And therefore, despite having no particular interest in the card Harvester of Souls, I'm going to give this one an A. I think this is a very nice upgrade from the existing option. Alright, so my friend Gold Sabertooth dared me, he defied me to give this Yogmoth Thran Physician time-shifting process anything but an A+, and I regret to say that he is right. I cannot defy this. I do think this is an A+ for me. So, Yogmoth only has one other printing. Obviously, there's no other art, but there's also no other reprint in general. And this is a mythic rare, so it is nice to get another Yogmoth on the market, even though these time-shifted cards are going to be ungodly expensive and very, very hard to acquire, but still, nevertheless, that doesn't hurt. And then something about Yogmoth's wall of text everywhere. I can't explain it, but you have the name taking up the entirety of the top bar here in the frame, and then you have the type lines taking up the entirety of the middle of the card, and then you have a gigantic wall of text here. And Yogmoth is a very, very unique creature in terms of how he is designed. It's kind of an eclectic mix of abilities, wouldn't you say? You don't exactly see protection from humans every day, and the other effects are really unique as well. On top of that, Yogmoth is, of course, a very, very central character to Magic the Gathering lore, stretching all the way back to some of the earliest sets, and therefore a great candidate to get an old border. The only question this raises is why was his compatriot Urza not also so honored with an old border? I do not know. And then on top of that, Yogmoth's art, some people have said they don't like it quite as much. I actually think it's pretty cool, and I also think the old border will enhance it. I think getting the more solid black frame around it, and also the older vibe, both of those things are going to do favors for the art in terms of how we see it, no matter what your opinion on it is as a baseline, which again, mine is fairly high. So yeah, Yogmoth Thran Physician, Gold Sabertooth is right. This guy gets an A+. Love to see it. And Vampire Hex Mage is next, and I have to say, guys, she gets another A+. What's going on with the Grim Tutor? Have I grown soft? Am I tenured now and I don't care? Am I just, growing soft in my old age and handing out A+ is easier than I used to? Nope, I honestly just think this pool of black cards on Black Monday is just that good, and Vampire Hex Mage, my goodness, I have always loved this card. I think the art is just so incredibly good. I also think the card design is awesome to the point where one of the first ideas I had when I was thinking of what cards can be really leveraged with Lurrus of the Dream Den back when it came out, back before Companion was nerfed, I thought of Vampire Hex Mage. I thought of trading Hex Mage for Planeswalkers and for Ether Vials and for Chalices of the Void, only to buy her back with Lurrus, and then, of course, a 2/1 first strike along the ground for 2 going Thalia, Guardian of Thraben mode. I absolutely love this card, and I think it's going to look absolutely stunning in the old border. Obviously a lot of people are going to be hyped about Yogmoth and Thoughtseize, and some of the blue and white cards we've seen as well, and of course Chalice and all the rest, but Vampire Hex Mage, I dare say, is probably the one I am most hyped about relative to what other people's hype levels might be, and also considering that I don't even play her. And I bet I would have done better on my foray into Legacy with Dark Depths if I had only had access to this old bordered Hex Mage. So yeah, fantastic, underrated decision to time shift her. She's gonna get an A+ from the Grim Tutor, no question about it. And despite this being my absolute favorite batch of cards we've seen so far, and one of my favorite sets that we've seen in a long time, we do end on a little bit more of a moderate note. I'm going to give Read the Bones merely a B-, and if there was an alternative art, it might even fall down into a C. I do think Read the Bones is a cool card. I do think it sees, enough play at kitchen tables and in other lower-powered formats, or probably Commander, for black decks that need some selection, to be a fine candidate, I guess, to reprint. But to me, it just does not suit the old border as well as so many of the other cards that we've seen. Specifically, if you look at these kind of pinkish-purple energy trails, for lack of a better way to describe them, surrounding and drifting off of the bones and of the circle around the bones. This screams new art to me, and it's not bad art, I don't dislike it, but this does not feel like an older card whatsoever. Just look at some of the old black cards that feature bones or feature skeletons, and you can tell the difference between the old ones and the new ones in terms of how they have taken this style of art that they're depicting here. So again, not the worst, not something I'm actively mad about, so that's why we're not dipping into the C's or, God forbid, the D's and the F's, right? But again, just not the very best candidate for time shifting in my view, specifically with this art. Not the greatest fit, B- for me, but there you go. Don't let that disturb your hype, my friends. Don't let that harsh your vibe. We have such exciting time-shifted printings here, I cannot even say any more than I already have, so let's end it here, and hey, I'll see you for the next session of grading when we get into maybe some red cards, some green cards. I don't know what is up next. Are we going to get gold ones? Let's hope so. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. This has been the Grim Tutor, grading, all caps, grading the batch of cards here on Black Monday.